Hi, welcome back to the TT Wine Explorer podcast. I'm Tania Tomaszewska. Today's episode is about art and wine. For longtime listeners, you'll recall that in episode 11 of this podcast series, I spoke with Sarah Adami Johnson of RBC. We spoke about the investment potential of wine, about wine as an alternative asset class, and how we value or hold wine. Wine and fine art have a lot in common in terms of how we view them as luxury goods and as assets which comprise their own special category. But for me, the real specialness and connection is how art and wine are both vehicles to the world of the senses, how they can transport us to another place. You know that feeling when you hear a certain song, smell a perfume, taste a wine, see color splashed across a canvas, which takes you back to a specific memory, moment, or place. Or it may take you somewhere else you've never been before. And this is all of your own experience. This is what I love about wine, and what I love about art or music or aromas or tastes which resonate with me. So today's episode is about the similarities and intersection of how we, the taster, the viewer, the consumer, connect with wine and art on that experiential level. My guest today is Lara Tomaszewska. Lara's CV is long, deep, and impressive. By way of quick snapshot, Lara has 3 university degrees focused on various aspects of art history, is a specialist in, among other things, contemporary, modern, old masters, and emerging artists. Lara is an art appraiser, and she's worked in galleries and curated with museums. Lara also has her own consultancy, Open Work Art Advisory, through which she works with private clients to buy, sell, or invest in art. And this includes working with wineries and winery owners. And most recently, Lara founded and launched ArtRow, an online digital art marketplace where buyers and sellers can transact. And this platform is for both artists and everyday people alike. ArtRow has picked up national attention in the Canadian art scene and is definitely a new player to watch. I first met Lara, before she was born. That's because Lara is my little sister. So I've had the opportunity to observe her evolution as a specialist and expert in her field, see her work in the wine industry space, and watch her ArtRow platform come to life. Over the years, Lara and I have had many, many conversations about art and wine, when or if it's commercialized, how we experience wine and art, either together or separately, and how the makers of art, including that liquid art in your bottle, connect with the consumer. So I thought that for today's episode, I'd share part of this conversation with you. I hope that you enjoy my discussion with Lara Tomaszewska today. Let's fly! Hi, Lara. Thanks so much for joining as my guest today.
Oh, hi, Tanya. That was such a great introduction. I feel honored to be here with you. And of course, my greatest accomplishment and achievement is being your little sister. So thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
Fantastic. Well, normally we do this over a coffee or a glass of wine, but today we're in our respective offices. And so let's get into it. So borrowing terminology from the art world, I thought this episode could be a triptych, or let's say a piece comprised of 3 components. First, I'd like to talk about how we experience works of art from a sensory level, how we ascribe value to those works or those experiences of ours. Then secondly, I'd like to chat a little bit about some of the work which you've been involved in, which integrates wine or wineries and art. And thirdly, I'd like to discuss current trends in the democratization of art and how we put more knowledge and power into the hands of the consumer, especially through things like your new ArtRow platform. On these points, I think that there are a lot of synergies between wine and art. But before we dive into all of this, let's kick off a little bit about your art adventure and how it started for you. I know that your CV is really, really lengthy, but could you just provide a brief snapshot about, how you got into the art world, how you've learned everything you've learned along the way, and what dots in particular connected with you to take you to where your place is now, where you're sitting in the market with your new startup?
Yeah, so really my passion for art started when I was 16, when my mom sent me to Paris to get me out of her hair. And I walked into Musée d'Orsay and I saw this huge Paul Seurat painting. And I was bouleversée, as they say in French. I was blown over, and I had to sit down on this bench to take in the awe of this painting. It was massive. There were, dots and points from pointillism, and I thought, how on earth did this artist do this? I was struck by the image, by the modernity of the image, And that really started my curiosity into art making, art history. And from there, I went on right through studying art history through bachelor's, master's, and PhD. When I was working at University of Victoria, probably in about 2010 or 2011, I started to feel a hankering for missing art, like the object itself. I had been in academia so long. Yes, I had worked through, always worked in galleries and museums, but I was really starting to miss that contact with art itself. And I started to then look at ways in which I could get back to that. And I landed upon appraisal studies and studied with the International Society of Appraisers in 2012 and have been an appraiser since. And so this was really the beginning, I think, of my current trajectory in my career, which is always trying to unite and merge art history with the art market. And these two spheres tend to be and have been separate traditionally. And that's what, underpins my practice, both as an art advisor and now as a founder of an art tech company, is how do we bring these two spheres together so that they can impact and reflect upon each other, because they actually do in more ways than we know.
Thank you. There are so many things, trajectories we can go off of that, but I love how you've tied that up to the next point, which I'd like to discuss, which is maybe the foundation of this when you talk about maybe a reflexiveness that wasn't there before. It seems to me that at the base of this is how we experience the art. We, as the eye of eye of the art, watching the art, as a consumer, as the person making the art. And I would say the same about wine. So let's take things back to first principles to start the conversation in terms of art's purpose and how we experience it. So in the context of wine tasting, I like to remind myself and encourage others who I'm tasting with that, it's their own experience to have with that wine, just to let their brain go, see what they, be present to smell and taste and look at the color and feel what resonates with them. And then they can decide if it's their jam or not. Yes, there can be an objective quality assessment of a wine as to whether it's an outstanding, good or fair or poor wine. But, I think on a subjective level, if you like the wine, and it's good if you want another glass or if you'd be minded to. So, is that too simplistic an approach if we think about how we experience art? I know art is a very broad term, but let's talk, think about what we might think of as traditional formats like paints and canvases and sculptures. The art world can be really intimidating, I think, to people, just as the wine world can be. So how do you encourage students or everyday people to assess art? If they're looking at a painting or a sculpture in whatever, in gallery or online, or, an installation piece, where do they start? What's the experience?
Mm-hmm. It's such a good question. I'm really thinking about tasting wine. And I think 100% your taste of wine or what you think of an artwork is in the moment your opinion, and there is no right or wrong to that. However, when it becomes interesting is when you start to taste more and more. So for example, I'm not a wine connoisseur in the same way obviously that you are. But every time I go to taste my wine, I've been taught by you the best that I have to look at the color, and then I look at the legs, and then I smell the bouquet, and then I taste it, and then I start to articulate what I taste. So if I just did that once, that would be one thing. But when I start to do that every time I go to a winery, I start to trust myself, and I start to compare to the last wine I tasted, and I start to have confidence in the way that I taste for myself. So while yes, of course, it's completely, there's no right or wrong, and there's nobody judging you, it is actually a practice, and it's your own practice. And so I think that's the good place to start. So in looking at art, what I say is just like in wine, you have to taste wine. I mean, that's the first step to even engaging with wine. And in art, you have to look at art. I mean, that's the first step, of course. So like tasting wine is actually a very active practice that's thoughtful. And in art, it's an active process of looking, and that's thoughtful. So how do we actually look at art then? And there's three core elements that I like to think about all the time, and I still use this. And that is, when we're looking at art, we look for form, content, and context. And these are your kind of building blocks of looking. Form is very simple. It's what color is it? What is this? Is it a painting? Is it a sculpture? Is it installation? Is it video? Is it abstract? Is it representational? Is it a portrait? How big is it? Right? What's the composition? Is it balanced? Is it cubist? Is it so that's sort of the first step, is actually visually analyzing it in your own terms, what it is you're actually looking at. That's kind of a way in. And then once you've done that, you think about the content of the work. By content, we just mean subject matter. Like, what is this actually portraying? Or you could also think about it in terms of messages. What is the theme? So is it portraying, is a portrait portraying a famous sitter? Is it depicting a war scene or a history scene? Is it abstract? And therefore we're thinking about something else, what it might represent. And so that really is about content. And then the last element is context. And this is where sometimes going away and doing some research or thinking or drawing in your own knowledge or experience is helpful. So context is, thinking about when the piece was made and what has informed the making or the creation of that work. So that starts, of course, with the artist and understanding who the artist is or who the artist was. But an artist never works in a vacuum. So therefore, one must also think of the social, political, historical, economic conditions within which the work was made. And then once you kind of understand that, there will be a broader understanding of the meaning of the work or where it might fit into a larger dialogue. And so those are sort of the three elements that I would suggest is a really good place to start your active practice of looking at art.
That is an excellent summary, I think. And there are a couple of things in particular that really resonated with me. One is practice. I've never thought about it as terms of a practice. People will talk about a yoga practice or they're practicing the piano, or I guess I practice tasting wine. But it is a practice. And that ties into the second thing is when I'm thinking about wine tasting and wine exploration and wine education, I do chat with people about it, about peeling back layers. And there are layers not only in the wine, but your experience. And you can peel back as many or as few layers as you like. You can peel back the first layer, which is probably like your first component. And as you get into things, and if you're interested, you keep peeling them back. And so thank you. I think that's very analogous to how many of us might decide to approach and practice wine tasting or wine exploring or wine travel. So thank you. And then I guess there is the whole that is subjective, but then there is an objective assessment of quality like there is in wine. We can make an assessment as to a wine is good or not, or outstanding or not flash. And I expect the same would be in art in very broad terms. So on that, the concept of value, and just jumping maybe to a separate track for a moment. Again, referring back to my episode chat with Sarah Johnson of RBC, she and I discussed the factors which determine value of a wine as an alternative asset class, in the terms of the investment world, things like provenance and storage, scarcity of the work, like you would in art, and how wine is in a liquid asset. There's no guarantee at any point in time of what that value of the bottle will be. It's going to be what the market will pay you for it, if you're holding this as an investment piece. So ultimately, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and you should just buy the wine that you think you're going to like, in addition to, maybe there'll be some investment upside. So where I'm getting to with this is you work with some of your work is with clients who are looking to buy and sell art, often for investment purposes, I understand. So my guess is that those clients probably are looking for a little bit more than your hunch as to what their fine art would be worth, or what would fetch at auction or in the marketplace right now. How do you help them get a sense of value? What sorts of tools would you look at? Or is it your brain and your gut only?
Mm-hmm. Gosh, you touched on so many important things. One thing is connoisseurship, because you mentioned that at the beginning. And I'm really interested in this concept. And it's an old-fashioned thing because back in the heyday, or, back in art, early 20th century, people would say, this is good art. And it would be the art gallery owner, or it would be an art historian who's written all of the books. And they would say, and they would be a connoisseur. And simply their statement, this is good, would mean it was good. I'm relieved that that is not always the case anymore, and I think that's also what you're doing in wine, because when as soon as there's that kind of hierarchical dictation of what is good, it closes off so much. It closes off the actual experience of the wine or the art. It limits the ability for an individual to form their own opinions. And it kind of actually stagnates any growth potential within the practices themselves, or within the experiences, or within the making of the artworks themselves. So that sounds like really negative about connoisseurship. And there's a place for connoisseurship, and there's a place for knowledge, and there's a place for that depth and breadth of knowledge. But I'm glad we're kind of understanding that that's not the only way. So connoisseurship is not what I'm about. So instead, I think the notion of value, and actually asking what is good, for lack of a better term, is important. Now, I'm not a gambler. I don't speculate on the future value of artwork. Now, in the stock market, there's people that do that, and they say, oh, this is what it's going to be worth, invest this, invest that. But I'm not doing that. And so as an appraiser, I'm adhering to a methodology that's really based in data. And then I'm also adding to that art historical methodology to analyze. So a strong appraisal or a strong statement of value has both data, and it has art historical, or what's the word? I guess it would be scholarly interpretation. And that's really where I come. That's how I approach value. That's first and foremost. That's how I approach value. So it's also important to note that not all art will appreciate, and so that's important too. Some people are just like, I love that piece. It's going to make me happy for as long as I live, and therefore it's worth the money. And I don't really mind if it appreciates or depreciates. And then there's clients that say, no, I know that I can make an investment here, and that there'll be a return, or could be a return, and that's interesting to me. And that, in fact, 60% of buyers have that as a secondary impulse. The first impulse is still, I love, is still emotional, and as it should be. And so that's one of the things that I also really do work with. That principle is really important. Buy what you love, invest in what you love, because you have to look at it and live with it, and it has to resonate within you to be meaningful. And if it does for you, then maybe it will for someone else. And then secondarily, for the people that are interested in the investment aspects of art, that is usually the second reason, and obviously is investment.
I think there are a lot of similarities with wine and how many of us experience wine, and what we're looking to do when we're buying wine for immediate consumption, or storage for longer term use, or investment. Most of the wine purchased in the world is consumed within 48 hours of purchase, but there is parts of it that aren't. So just getting into, you touched on clients that you work with who they have to love what they're buying, or it's their choice, the reasons why they're buying, their motivations. So I'd like to maybe kind of just to narrow focus in now for a case study, and this is where we can get maybe into the wine world a little bit more explicitly, is how you work with a client when you're helping them to curate or develop a program for a vision that they have, with their own desires and what resonates with them, and what they're looking, if it's public art, for example, what they would like to bring to the world, so to speak, to people coming to their businesses. So in this case, I'm thinking about a winery. And I thought that we could use Phantom Creek Estates as a case study. And you work with them on their parts of their art program. So for those who don't know, Phantom Creek Estates is a British Columbia winery. It opened in 2020, so the year of the first pandemic lockdown. They opened in many ways. It's a monumental undertaking. So its location. It's spectacularly located in the Southern Okanagan Valley. It has sweeping views of the valley floor and mountains and sweeping hillsides. The vineyards that they have an amazing pedigree, for lack of better words, very famous in the context of British Columbia winemaking. Lots of sun, beautiful, rich, mixed soils, glacial till, volcanic. The building, the structure itself is very large, and maybe something that you would expect perhaps to see if you were to go to Napa or Bordeaux or other wine regions. Not to say that there isn't anything necessarily that isn't like that in British Columbia, but the owner, when was interested in those other regions in the development, and also state-of-the-art winemaking facilities. So it's on many levels. There's a lot going on there. And for people in the wine world, Mark Maringer of Napa fame and Olivier Humbrecht of Alsatian fame have been consulting winemakers and part of the winemaking program there. So that's just for by way of backdrop for people who haven't been or not familiar with Phantom Creek Estates. It also has a spectacular and beautiful wine, in my view, art program, an art collection. I'll use that loosely, and installations. So you worked with the winery to help select and for them to commission some very large and important pieces of art that are now on their land and in their building. And before we maybe dive into a few of those examples of those pieces, individual pieces, could you share with us a little bit of what your brief was when working with the winery in terms of, the vision of how the art selected would be to tie into the land and the space, or the vision that was being created there, either the natural geography or the human creation? What elements were you looking to embrace or embody with the art or convey?
Yeah, it's such an exciting and beautiful place. I was just there this past weekend, actually, and it's had a tour of the facilities. And as you say, the winemaking facilities are incredible. The wine was delicious. That Riesling I still am thinking about and brought many bottles home. So it really is quite a place to visit. I started working with them, I think it was 2018, just before they'd even broke ground for construction. And that's an important element because I went up to the site before there was any building on there. So I could really feel the elements, understand the views, the vantage points, the site, the soils, everything that they were trying to do. So got a first glimpse at the architectural drawings, so that we could really integrate the artwork from the ground up as really integral into the design of the site and not just plonked on after. So that's kind of a dream as an art consultant, to have that kind of whole, that holistic approach to installing artwork. So that was the first thing that I really appreciated about that. Once we saw the site, then we really undertook a series of discovery meetings with the management and the owner of the winery to drill down on what exactly the ethos of the winery was or is. A lot of people, who come to me and ask for my help don't have that clarity around. They might know what their winery stands for, their business stands for, but when you actually have to translate it into a visual form, it becomes really interesting and a really incredibly unique exercise. So we did that. We did series of discovery meetings to understand what exactly it is that we wanted to portray through the artwork. And we discovered that, yes, it was primarily about the elements of nature itself, protecting nature, and all the while embodying notions of symmetry and balance and harmony. And this would be not only would these principles be important in selecting artwork, but also in the design and the flow of the actual architectural space and the built environment. So feng shui was important as energy flow, and this is really evident when you go up to the site. So these were the first things we considered. Interestingly, when you think of public art, you might think of a civic space, and artwork that you see in civic spaces have been selected according to a very complex set of criteria. There's often different groups that have different agendas about their identity that they might want to put forth, or the history of a place, for example. In this case, it is a private group that's commissioning artwork, yet it's viewed by the public. So it really is their privilege and their ability to put forth what it is they stand for. So I thought that was such an interesting exercise, and it's a different type of viewership. It's also very exciting for artists who have the ability to display in places like wineries, like our artist in residence programs, because, we're very used to this narrow venue of viewing artwork. It's like a museum or it's a gallery. And wineries offer this incredible, incredible space for art, not only production, art exhibition for artists, but also for viewers to really understand a different dimension of what it is to look at art. And I think it really brings in people to the actual appreciation of art. I mean, everybody that walks into Phantom Creek will stop and interact with the artwork. I observed that. So the last thing I wanted to mention on this question was the idea of placemaking. And this is something that my dear friend, who's an urban planner and landscape designer, talked about a lot over this past weekend when we were there. When we put artwork or these types of sculptures or installations that are so impressive and they're interactive, and you have to physically engage with them, it aids in the sense of placemaking. So what is this place about? It delineates a special space. It creates almost a sacred space when you walk in. So that's a really interesting way of looking at it too. So those were some of the considerations that I had when I started the project.
I think I agree with you in terms of the sense of space. And I think a lot of people, when they go to wine country, and let's even aside from, let's say, the layers of art that might be integrated, feel that you're in wine country. You're in a beautiful area. Typically, wine country is in beautiful parts of the world. You're seeing the terroir. You're walking on the land. You're seeing where grapes grow. You're around a production area where people are very passionate about what they're doing. And it is another world, and you can go there and you can be there. And so I too have observed at Phantom Creek and other wineries in the world where I've gone, where there is a palpable art overlay, I'll just say obvious, in terms of art being integrated either outside on the grounds or inside the building. Some people say often the buildings themselves are a piece of art. You walk through and you have this multi-layered experience. And I agree with you that observing, I've spent quite a bit of time on Phantom Creek property. When people come up the drive and go to the top and see the views and then are close to what I'll call the angels of the spirits, which we'll get into, people just stand there. They can't move. They don't go. They wait before they go into the winery because they just want to be there in that moment. So from that, why don't we just cut to a few examples of the pieces there, just so people get a sense of what's involved. This is a large property and a large undertaking, and it was a large project. And 3 pieces. There's a lot more than that here. A lot of detail to the architectural design and smaller bits, but there are 3 pieces I'd say that people immediately will think of. And in each case, the artists are from different parts of the world, quite renowned, maybe not known to people who were locally coming, but now would be. So and different materials. So 2 are outside and 1 is inside in a very special cellar. Can you just give a little snapshot of each piece, what it's called, what its composition is, a little bit of the artist, and maybe why it was selected to be in that place?
Yes, of course. So when we arrive, the far sculpture is called Helios, and it's made in Sienna marble, and it's by British sculptor Emily Young. And then you move down through towards the winery, and you see the soaring angels in the sky, Pro Terra Natura, which is by Wu Ching Ru, who is a indigenous Taiwanese artist. And then as you move through into the winery and down into the cellar, the founder cellar, I think is what it's called, you see the spectacular chandelier by Dale Chihuly that was commissioned specifically for the site. So the logic of the installations is important to understand. So what we have, really what I wanted to do was to, through the art installations, mimic the journey of the grape into wine. So starting with the raw fruit of the grape, and as it moves through the process of picking and fermentation and barreling into tasting. And so that's really the journey that we wanted to mimic through the art. So with Helios, you have raw, untouched stone that is representative of the sun. So there you have the primary element of grape growing in this raw form. And then as you move through to the angels, you have earth and nature, which are represented in the two forms. And those are in bronze. So those have been somewhat refined, obviously, and put together through fabrication and a process. But they still represent these fundamental elements of nature that help the grape transform. And then the final installation inside, when you're in the inner sanctum, is glass, which is blown sand, which is refined sand. So it's ultimately a refined result of these elements of nature, just as the grape would then be finally in this glass a refined product of this transformation. So that's really what we wanted to do. Is what I wanted to do was mimic that. And then secondarily, I wanted it to be a metaphor for transformation, because transformation is obviously a key element in all aspects and patterns of nature, from photosynthesis to everything we see in nature. And obviously in wine, it's the most crucial metaphorical process that happens, this transformation, and all of the things along the way that affect that transformation. And that's where the artistry comes in, and that's where the science comes in, so that you taste this glass of wine at the end. And so really that transformation is sort of the metaphorical theme of that cycle of installations.
I mean, each one of those we could chat about for 10 hours or go to the land and have a glass of wine and sit there and just be with it. These are important pieces in many ways, and it's not an insignificant undertaking to have commissioned them on the part of the owner and to have engaged with the artists. I know you worked with the owner closely to do this. And so for the owner to embrace the land and those elements and share the art that the owner had engaged or commissioned for these purposes. It's a large undertaking. And so I imagine, that's a lot of probably emotional work with your clients generally when they are, this is part of their creation.
Yeah.
So congratulations.
Oh, thank
because
you.
ultimately you and the owner would have worked, and the management team would have worked together to find and select and pinpoint what they wanted, because it's their creation. But I can imagine you have the world, there's so much there, and to go through and work through to come to that point itself, the process must have been fascinating. I
have to say.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say absolutely, and I think what I learned so much from the owner and the architect who was also part of that vision, obviously, but the owner had a very clear vision about things like feng shui and the importance of preserving nature and getting that message across. And that was an unwavering vision that was extremely clear, and that made it a lot easier to, we found works from all over the world, and the owner was able to make very clear decisions about what he believed would work. And you can feel it when you're there, because, it isn't one person's vision, obviously. It was his vision, but it requires a team to pull that off and to put it into actual material physical form.
And just jumping from installation to global connectivity, I know it seems like a big jump, but it isn't really. And my segue is the Chihuly, because in March, I was in Las Vegas. One of my earlier episodes was about that. And I went through the Bellagio and I saw the Chihuly ceiling, as they call it, in the Bellagio Hotel. Very famous when Steve Wynn commissioned that, I think, or brought it in. And I guess my point is art can pop up in lots of different places. But my second point is that not everyone's going to have a Chihuly. And so with that, I'd like to go into the democratization of art. And I think there's a lot of synergies here with the discussion about democratization of wine. And for me, this ties into things like the rise of the digital marketplace, knowledge is power, giving more knowledge to the consumer, or giving them the platform for them to educate themselves, to make their choices, being what I like to say in general terms, knowing participants in your story. And that's with any kind of product or service or luxury good that we have. So certainly in the world of wine, with the rise of the digital marketplace and Googling, things like you're talking about, people sometimes or often will still rely on the rating of connoisseurship, but they can click, they can do their own reading, they can do their own research, they can look the market, they can comparison shop, and they can do it from home. And the wine world's a bit different than the art world, well, in many ways, but there's a different kind of regulatory overlay. So I'll park the wine world for a minute. But this is just to get into what you're doing with ArtRow. So, this is your new art marketplace. For those, can you explain what ArtRow is? Why did you start it? What gap were you seeing?
Mm-hmm.
Who's it for? And, how does it work?
Yes, so ArtRow is an online art marketplace for independent buying and selling of fine art. And we vet every single work of art that's on the platform, and anyone can apply to list to sell their work, and anyone can come on and buy it. So it was a long time in the making, but through my years in the art market, I lived in London. I've done a lot of private sales, worked in the higher end of the market, and one thing that I've been struggling with, or that I've noticed, and that's a problem in the art market, or a challenge in the art market, well, there's two. One is the lack of access and inaccessibility of the art market to the everyday person. So we could view that as exclusivity or as elitism, or the feeling of being intimidated to enter into the art market. And the other is actually a lack of public trust. And those are pervasive problems. So the first one, we just think about general, many of us have had that experience. You walk into an art gallery and there's no pricing on the wall, and you're thinking, gosh, and who do you ask? Well, there's only one person in here and they're not paying attention to me, and I have to ask. And then, or you just don't have any information about the artist or the price, or even if you do know the price, you're not sure, is that price to the artist? Is that price? What are the fees? But just to walk into an art gallery, that's even if you walk into an art gallery. So there's this idea that they're rarefied spaces. And I think that kind of precludes a lot of limitation in the art market, because, look, at art is everywhere. People love art. People are constantly looking at art and making art and talking about art. So there's a chasm really between our everyday experiences of art and our feelings around art production and creativity, and then this art market that seems so untouchable. The second problem is, as I said, this lack of public trust, or eroding public trust. Seems like every day there's a story in the paper about, a fake or a forgery or embezzlement, and this kind of adds to that feeling and that belief that somehow this upper echelon of the art market is not only untouchable but also unsavory. Now, that's really when we're thinking about sometimes dealers or private dealers, or and of course these are few and far between. The majority is absolutely professional, but these are stories that get media attention, and that's unfortunate. When we think of auction houses, these are really the most transparent organizations or selling vehicles in the market, because it's public. So we have all the pricing, we know exactly the fees, we know what's there. Anybody can kind of use them. There's regional auction houses, national auction houses. So that's really the most transparent. But there's also issues with auction houses. And so these were kind of some of the things that I was thinking about when I thought, what can I do? What can we do to answer some of these questions and these problems? So that's how ArtRow came up.
Congratulations. So Douglas Magazine, British Columbia's Douglas Magazine, included ArtRow and you in their top 10 people and companies to watch for this year, 2024. So congratulations.
Thank you.
ArtRow is a disruptor in the art space right now, and it's very, very exciting. people might be thinking in the back of their minds, you mentioned fine art. Well, what's fine art? Is that, I inherited a bunch of things from Granny and, I don't know, maybe it's fine art, maybe it's not. What do you suggest to people if they're not sure whether it's, something that could be on ArtRow or not? I guess even aside from ArtRow, what do you suggest if people have art in their homes or their garages that's been sitting there and they're like, oh, maybe I should have a think about what to do with this? What's their starting point?
Yeah, no, that's really also what I wanted to try to do with ArtRow was really be accessible to people to feel welcome and to learn. And so we have on our site, there's inquire buttons, there's ways of contacting us, and we are so happy and excited to look at anything really. And so our job is, we're sort of the first line of defense. So send us images, send us any information on the history of the work, and from there we can direct. So for us, and this is sort of coming back to the investment part of our discussion, although ArtRow has all sorts of art opportunities on it, we do really vet and select the work, and it's not that we're saying every single thing on ArtRow is going to go up 100 times in value, and we're not saying that, but what we are saying is the value that we place on the artwork on our site is justified. And these are the ways we justify it. So the main thing we look for is the artist. That is sort of the most crucial element in establishing value. And so if that artist has a track record, they have a CV, they've been in museum collections, they've had exhibitions, they're in publications, then right away that artist becomes of interest because it's an artist that you can research and it's an artist that probably has relevance or had relevance at a certain time. And so that becomes more interesting for us.
And I think you say the art world in your hands, which is for the consumer. And so for those who are interested, artrow.com, Lara mentioned her website. That's it, www.artrow.com. And in terms of tools, if you're interested in following along and learning about the art world generally and different trends and artists and art history, ArtRow does send out great newsletters, I think. So I know I'm your sister, but I'm saying that because I get a lot of newsletters from lots of different sectors. And I think it's a great newsletter for those who are interested just to learn more about the art world, I recommend it. Okay, so just to kind of round out the conversation and taking things back out into the world, I mentioned that, ArtRow is a disruptor in the art world right now, marketplace disruptor. When we're thinking now about other disruptors, there are a lot, but people might think about things like NFTs, and we won't get into that. Sarah Johnson gave a great explanation of an NFT, but people hear about Banksy. Banksy's art, disintegrates, self-destructing. I think that's disruptive. Things, disruption can bring good things and can be creative. It's not always just chaos. So in terms of the general trends you're seeing in the art world, things maybe, is there anything disruptive that you think is resonating with consumers that are going to stay? Are we going to all be going into digital media and digital art? Or, is the traditional media like canvas and marble, is it going to be around? Or, what are you seeing that might stick or something new that's kind of hitting the scene right now?
Mm-hmm. You're talking about just actual artworks.
Yeah, anything to do in the art world.
Yeah,
taking it back
well,
out.
I think NFTs in and of themselves. I think the jury is out, and it's a fascinating place to be and to watch. I think blockchain technology is here to stay, and I think is important. I think one of the challenges for the art market is provenance and ownership. And I think that and eventually ArtRow, we're just starting, but I think that technology is huge and is going to be more and more important in the art market. Everything from blockchain certification so that where that piece has been and your ownership is also imprinted. Everything and authentication tools where you can take a picture of your artwork and scan it through an authenticator, and it's not absolute, but it's a good indication. Things like instant data, so you can type in an artist's name and get every auction result on that artist, exhibition history, and that is at the moment of sale when you want to find this stuff out. So I think technology integrations in general are here to stay in the art market, as they should be. And I'm really excited that ArtRow's future is really going to be incorporating these aspects of technology into the art market into the art platform. In terms of actual artworks and art creativity, the sky's the limit, just like in art and wine production. So I think that AI art production is going to be something interesting. And I think I don't know where that's going, but it's certainly an important question, generative AI, and what is art, and is someone who creates these images an artist, and what does that mean? I'm very interested in that. At this point, we don't have any AI generated art on our website. But it's an area of interest, and we're constantly writing about it and thinking about that. I think that tangible physical art is here to stay, and it will be forevermore. I think that there's something, and maybe this is romantic, but there's that primordial urge that every human has when they're little to draw a circle or to look at the sun and draw a circle. And I feel like there is that human expression that is bodily, that does come from us. And so I do feel that physical object that has been created, whether it was a video, whether it's an installation, whether it's a performance piece, it doesn't have to be a traditional media that we think of like painting or sculpture, but where it comes from this creator and it's a bodily expression somehow, or it comes from the body. And I am thinking of Marshall McLuhan here, when he talks about that extension of the body when we're creating messages. So I think it's such a fascinating time. And it really is. Thinking about the art market is like thinking about humanity in general and where we are in this moment in time on this planet. So,
well, the medium is the message, as Mr. McLuhan said. And so wine is one of the mediums of the messages of our point in time of history. And interesting points, because I think too in the wine world, scarcity and provenance and using blockchain technology to make sure that wine can be traced, and QR codes for labeling, for truth in labeling, but also for the story. And AI, that's, I think I'll do another episode on AI. How does the AI, generative AI affect, grape to glass in the wine industry? And so I think there are a lot of similarities between wine and art, but yes, the bodily part and the senses. So that'll take us back to the beginning. So on that, I think we'll wrap it for today. I'd like to thank you so much for joining and for your elucidating and very concise descriptions and summaries of aspects of the art world that many people would find intimidating. I really appreciate that. I'd like to congratulate you on all of your accomplishments to date and on the forward trajectory of ArtRow. I look forward to seeing where it flies to. And I look forward to seeing you in person with a glass of wine and a coffee very soon in our hometown of Victoria to continue the chat. So thanks for spending the time with us today.
Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. And congratulations on your podcast series. I love it.
Thanks so much. Thanks. Okay. Take
Thanks,
care.
Tanya. Okay. See you soon.
Bye. Hey, thanks for tuning in today. I hope that you enjoyed the discussion. I've got 4 calls to action for you. First, I think I'm doing an episode on how generative AI or AI tools may be used in the wine world. I think that there could be a lot of interesting things to discuss around everything from grape to glass, such as farming technology, through to manufacturing, to packaging, labeling, distribution, and how we think, write, or learn about wine. I've got a few speakers in mind, but please do let me know if you have any idea as to someone who'd be a great guest to chat with about AI issues in the wine world. I'm all ears. Secondly, if there are any specific topics or episode discussions which you'd like to hear on my series, please do let me know. I have a number of ideas up my sleeve, but I always love hearing feedback. Feel free to email me at tanya@ttwinecouncil.com, or if you play in the Instagram world, you can direct message me at ttwineexplorer. Thirdly, if you have the time and are so inclined, please do share this podcast episode or series with friends or family who you think would be interested. I'm all word of mouth right now, and I'm growing one listener at a time. And fourthly, if you'd like to have my future episodes drop straight to your listening device, please do look for me and follow the TT Wine Explorer podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast series. And finally, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank everyone who has provided me with their comments, their ideas, and their encouragement. Sometimes I just don't know what's happening out there, so it's great to get some feedback. I'm loving this creative process, and I look forward to meeting you back here again soon on the TT Wine Explorer podcast. Until then, take care.